Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about Spider-Man No Way Home. I know I haven't done a lot of movie reviews here on the channel anytime recently, but I went and saw Spider-Man No Way Home last night at a very late showing, and I have a lot I want to say about this. I know that, especially when it comes to Spider-Man, I don't talk about Spider-Man a lot here on the channel. Spider-Man is absolutely one of my favorite superheroes. Maybe my favorite, tied with a couple others, maybe, but I love the entire. How do I word this? I'm trying not to spoil too much in this non-spoiler section. I love just about everything about this movie. There are like two big problems I have, but otherwise, I adore this movie. I know a lot of people have problems with Tom Holland's Spider-Man. He definitely wasn't my favorite of them at first, but I have come to love Tom Holland's Spider-Man just as much as I love Toby Mcguire and Andrew Garfield's. I think that in a lot of ways, this is still not my favorite Spider-Man movie. That is Spider-Verse without question. I love Into the Spider-Verse. But this is my favorite of the Marvel Spider-Man movies. And I think I need to rewatch it again before I know for sure. But right now, I think I kind of like it more than Spider-Man 2, which was my favorite before. I really, really enjoyed this movie. And I have a lot I want to say about it. And I'm probably going to ramble a lot here. But for this non-spoiler section of if I think you should watch this movie, if you're a Spider-Man fan, if you're a fan of the Sam Raimi Spider-Mans or the Andrew Garfield, the Amazing Spider-Man movies, you absolutely should watch this movie because I think it brings closure in some ways, but I also think that it ties in together so well that if that is a thing that you've been looking for is more of that story, more of some of those characters, right? I'm trying not to spoil too much about who specifically, then I think absolutely you should. And of course, this is the next step forward in Tom Holland's Spider-Man story. This in the current Marvel Cinematic Universe Spider-Man. Absolutely incredible. Very, very good step forward. And I think we'll answer a lot of the complaints that I see people talk about. We'll talk about those when we get into spoilers, which we're going to do right now. So right off the bat for this movie, one of the biggest things that I enjoyed is the way that it's not just the fun romp crossover movie that I expected it to be. I expected most of this movie would be the three Spider-Men together fighting the bad guys and having a big glorious battle over the course of the entire city, right? And this movie wasn't that in a way that I think is really good. This movie focuses on Tom Holland, and realistically, it focuses on him becoming the Spider-Man I know and love, you know? And I enjoyed Tom Holland's Spider-Man before. I absolutely did. I think the moments with him and Tony are very, very good. And that is one of the best moments in the MCU is that hey, Mr. Stark, I don't feel so good. I think that there are so many great moments with those characters. But in a lot of ways, that Spider-Man was very different, right? And some people had a huge problem with that. Some people didn't. I'm one of those people that was like, hey, it's a different use of the character. He's being used differently, but I still like him. He's still Spider-Man. He's still got the quips. I'm still having fun, you know? But this movie turns him into that Spider-Man in a lot of ways. I mean, by the end of the movie, again, we're in all spoilers here. I'm going to spoil everything if you have not seen this movie yet. By the end of the movie, he's in the classic Spider-Man style apartment, you know? He's on his own, broke. He's Spider-Man. And I want to clarify when I say that, I mean he's Peter Parker, right? Obviously, Miles Morales is a different Spider-Man. His story is very different. And I don't think Spider-Man has to have that apartment, be broke, be alone to be Peter Parker, right? But when I think of Peter Parker, that's what I think of. I'm not one of those people that goes, well, you have to follow that. But I do find a narrative satisfaction in the fact that this Peter Parker didn't start that way, but he still got there by the end. Because no matter what, Peter Parker will always be Peter Parker. And I really enjoy Peter over the course of this movie. I know there are multiple Peters, but Peter over the course of this movie, I think, grows in such a cool, focused narrative way. It's not just, well, he's this person, then he's this person. This movie really, really puts in the work to get him from point A to point B. And I really appreciated that. The first part of the movie focuses on their friendship between him and Ned and MJ. And, everything's going great. They're doing great. Everything's going together. And then everybody knows he's Spider-Man, but hey, that's okay. We can work with that. We're going to MIT. And just the slow unraveling of everything. And the fact that, in a very Peter Parker fashion, if he had just gone to talk to the Dean instead of Doctor Strange, things might have been incredibly different. But great power comes great responsibility, and when things start to fall apart, he steps up. I think that I just did the thing. Like, every review is going to bring that line up, right? But that's when you're talking about Spider-Man, how can you not, right? But I think the fact alone that this movie subverted, and I'm not one of those people that's like, well, I need a movie to subvert my expectations, but I was so sure this movie was just going to be the crossover, right? But instead, this movie puts in so much work to give payoffs for almost everybody, and that's one of my big issues, is that Doc Connors gets basically nothing and is just kind of there so that we have another amazing Spider-Man villain. But everybody else gets a ton of, even like Flint Marko gets work put in for his character. You know, like, they do so much for these characters that are coming back from these other movies to really help them grow as characters in a way that I find incredible. I think it's very, very narratively satisfying. I think it's very, very good. With that said, some of my favorite moments in this movie are still the fight between Peter and Doctor Strange. That fight is incredible. One of the things that we don't get to see very often with Doctor Strange in this series, in the MCU, is him getting to go wild, right? His fight with Dormammu is more just him coming back over and over again, even though it's a really good scene, don't get me wrong. When he's helping to fight against Thanos, it's mostly just him trying to hold the gauntlet. You know, there's so much of he is busy doing other things that we don't really get to see him just go wild. And here he's still not going wild in the fight with Peter in the mirror dimension because he's trying not to hurt him, because he does genuinely care about him, you know? But I think it's a very, very good fight. And the way that Peter wins is not, hey, I'm better at magic than you, or hey, I'm better than you. It's just, hey, I tricked you because I'm Spider-Man. And I think there's a really good moment also when we talk about like how smart Peter is. There's a really good moment later where Peter is like at the lab with the other two Peters, and they're just immediately going to work because of course they are. They're Peter Parker. And there's so much I want to say. I want to start hitting characters here, but I think that where this movie works is in that storytelling. I think the writing in this movie is very clever, except for 2 points where I was like, okay, well, this is happening just so the movie can happen. But let's start at the beginning, right? I think that the stuff with figuring out that he's Spider-Man from Mysterio and then the reaction to that is very, very good. I think that people reacted exactly as you would expect them to, right? You have some people that are trying to show up at the door, but you have Happy and S.H.I.E.L.D. to try and, or Stark Industries, not S.H.I.E.L.D., to try and keep them back, right? You have the people in the crowds that support him and the people in the crowds that don't, the people that don't want to believe it, the people that do. Have all these different connections, and you see the way it affects his friends and his family. And I do think we could have had a little bit more maybe from like MJ's family of like, hey, you can't be around this guy anymore. He's dangerous. But I think for the most part, it does a really good job of selling that theme of, hey, this is the cost of your identity being found out. And it also has a really nice payback to like Tony Stark as Iron Man, right? Of this is the thing that he did, but realistically, he didn't have a family. He didn't have to go to school. You can't just be him. You have to be you, you know? And it's not that he did the same thing as Tony, but I think it's really interesting the way that works. From there, getting into the college scene and trying to get back from there into... There's a good chunk of this movie that is just set up, and it pays off really, really well. Because a good chunk of this movie is dedicated to, hey, Peter can't handle the stress, and MJ and Ned are trying to make him feel better. But also maybe they can't handle the stress, but they're doing it. They're working together. They're going to make it. And then you get Peter going to Doctor Strange. And I love the way Strange is used in this movie. I mentioned that before. I think that he's utilized very well here. Just having him be, you know, hey, yeah, I'm going to help you out, kid, because, you know, you've suffered enough. And then just, what have you done? Literally, what have you done, Parker? To the moments with, you know, don't call me sir, and then call me sir. It just... There's so much good in this movie because you got all those little moments between Parker and Strange before, but they weren't big, you know? And so to get more of that here is very, very good, I think. I like it a lot. Again, I already mentioned the fight. We got to talk about the villains, right? We got to talk about Doc Ock. Doc Ock coming through. Alfred Molina shows up and I was so stoked. I just started hitting the seat, just like, oh, it's so good. And he's just immediately back into that role, and you find out that this is from right before they die. And so he has no idea that he's about to die. He has no idea what happened. He has no idea he's about to have a change of heart and save the city. Um, but the whole fight scene on the bridge with him thinking it's his Peter Parker and it's not is very, very good. The stuff with the nanotech is very solid. I like the fact that it's Doc Ock's own arrogance of trying to steal the nanotechnology that causes his arms to be unusable. It's not that Peter beat him, it's that Doc Ock's own arrogance beat him, which I think is very good. There is a weird moment where they make fun of Otto's name, Otto Octavius, and they all laugh about it, and it's like, but your name's Peter Parker, man. I don't think you get to make fun of that. But other than that, very, very solid scene. Dr. Octopus fixing the chip where he can be himself again without the voices. That scene's so good, and I knew it would pay off, right? I knew he'd come back to help later, and he absolutely does, and it's very, very good. You have the touching moment with Toby Mcguire and Alfred Molina of just like, Peter and then Otto. It's so good. Do I want to talk about Osborn yet, or do I want to save Osborn? The Lizard. The Lizard's one of my big sad points in this movie. One of my big problems, which is that he kind of Doc Connors kind of just does nothing. Like, he causes some problems and he has a decent fight scene on the Statue of Liberty, but that's really about it. I guess he has that one moment where he's like, I told you there'd be consequences. But that's kind of it. And again, it really feels like, especially compared to what Electro gets to do, it really feels like they just needed another Amazing Spider-Man villain to round out the cast. But, maybe the CG was too expensive. I don't know. But Electro is incredible in this movie. I think Electro's so good here. Hey, I'm not a bad guy. I never was a bad guy. I wanted to be popular and I wasn't. I wanted to be seen and I wasn't. And then I got power and I was. He was never a bad person to begin with, right? And then he fell into the eels and everything happens there. And so you get these little moments of like, I just got one question for you. That's your Lego set? It's just like, yeah, he's still him. It's just he's also Electro. And I think it's a really interesting juxtaposition with him and Osborn too, where it's not a different voice. It's the man himself having to choose. And sometimes he chooses right. Sometimes he chooses wrong. There's a very good scene with him with Andrew Garfield later where he's like, well, I thought you'd swinging around Queens helping people. I thought she'd be black. And then Andrew Garfield is like, well, there's probably a black Spider-Man out there somewhere in the multiverse. And it's like, yeah, we know. But, yeah, Electro is very, very good in this movie. I think they did a great job with him. Just very, very solid. And I love the fact that he's able to get a hold of the arc reactor and then immediately recognize how strong it is. And he's just completely confident at that point. You can't beat me anymore, I love that too. He's not just in the blue. He's not just blue. He goes yellow here like regular Electro. He gets the star on his face. It was so good. So good. Electro, man. Great in this movie. Sandman, Flint Marko, amazing in this movie. Absolutely loved him. His conflicted loyalties of, I just want to get home to see my daughter, and I'm not sure you can pull this off. And the way he bounces between the two, very, very good. Loved it. Osborn. How do we talk about Willem Dafoe's Osborn without just immediately losing our minds? Because he is Norman Osborn in my mind. There's no way he's not. He has the line of, I'm something of a scientist myself. And the theater just chuckle all throughout the theater. Just a couple people clapping, Norman Osborn. Willem Dafoe did it again, man. He captured that manic energy that is Norman Osborn, that depression of the man that has been taken over by the goblin, the man that's desperately trying to be good, that goes to the homeless shelter, that is trying to take care of himself, that realistically actually likes Peter Parker and always has, right? And wants him to be good, doesn't know where his son is, goes to his house isn't there, other people live there, and then the goblin who refuses to go. And you have this this amazing dynamic between the man that Peter wants to help and the man that Peter wants to kill, which is Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man all over again, right? And it's so good. There is the moment with Aunt May. Aunt May in this movie is great, as usual. But there's the moment, and I knew when she stabs Osborn in the neck, I knew what was coming. Because she's on that ground floor, there's all that rubble around, it's time for a callback, and the glider comes down behind her, and I knew what was going to happen because she doesn't have spider sense. And when she gets up and it seems like everything's okay, I was like, really? But then it happens. And that scene's very good. I think that Tom Holland's performance in that scene is incredible. But I think what really sells that scene for me is Aunt May saying, hey, I just need to catch my breath. Because she's gone into shock and she doesn't know what's happening. And then Happy seeing it and immediately throwing himself into being arrested so he could tell Peter to run. The scene's so good. And it's perfect for Goblin. It's exactly what he would do. The moment where they get the box back and it has the Goblin bomb in it, Goblin is incredible in this movie. And from the very first moment of him like coming through the cloud laughing, it was like, yep, all right, this movie has to be good now because Willem Dafoe is Norman Osborn. And so like, for the other problems that I have, which we'll get to in a minute, I really do love this movie. And I think a big chunk of that is because of the way these characters are able to just be themselves. They didn't try to rewrite them. They didn't try to change them. They just let them come back in a really cool way. And speaking of coming back, well, we have to talk about Andrew Garfield and Tobey Mcguire. Because Amazing Spider-Man shows up. And he is just as unsure while trying to be sure as he always was, right? And this is a Peter that's very tormented. Because he lost his Gwen, his MJ, right? As he puts it. He is very torn on everything, and he's very bitter, and the way that he fights is very harsh. And he's still playful, he's still Peter Parker, but he's not the same Peter Parker, And I think it's so interesting to see the juxtaposition between young, naive, could go down the wrong path Peter Parker, middle ground, been Spider-Man for a while, has gone down the dark path Peter Parker, and older, wiser, made his mistakes, lost his people, and is now just trying to do better Peter Parker and Tobey Maguire. And I think the way all three of them interact is so good. Because they're still Peter, right? They're still dorky. They're still having fun. They're still calling him Peter 1, Peter 2, Peter 3. They're having a great time. They recognize each other as Peter Parker immediately. They nerd out over the fact that Tobey Maguire can fire the web fluid straight from his body, and they try to figure out how that works. And they're like, well, if it's too personal. And the Peters are so good together. And the moment where it's all cemented together is the moment where they finally decide to work together. They start working together, and they jump off the building together and web swing and all go, whoa. Because each of them gets that moment in their movies, but then they all do it together, and it's so good. This movie is pure fan service in the best possible way, while also being an incredible movie for Tom Holland's Peter Parker. So, Andrew Garfield gets his moment, right? I think of the three, he gets less time to shine, though I think he has more screen time than Tobey Maguire. But he gets his moment where MJ is falling, and he's able to save her. And this time, instead of the web to her, he webs the ceiling and he catches her. And it just, there's the look on his face when he realizes that this time he didn't mess it up. This time he was fast enough. This time he was strong enough. And it's not his MJ. It's not Gwen. But it is another Peter's. And he can save him from that. And it's so good, man. And then, of course, Tobey Maguire gets his moment as well. Both in the when Uncle Ben died moment on the roof, which is incredible. It's such a good moment because Tom Holland is like, I'm having to call by the actor name, so it's not just Peter. Tom Holland is like, hey, don't try to say you know what I'm dealing with. Don't try to say you know what I've been through. You don't. It's like, well, yeah, they do actually. They absolutely do. You know, and in some ways, both of them have lost more than you did. I mean, you lost Tony and Aunt May, but you have Andrew Garfield who lost Uncle Ben and Gwen, and you have Tobey Maguire who lost Uncle Ben and Harry and so many more, right? And it just so many good moments. I literally cannot name off all the good moments for you because of how good they all are. But top moments for me are that rooftop scene, the woohoo, and the moment where Andrew Garfield is able to catch MJ. That moment is incredible. And of course, then Tobey Maguire, like I was saying, he gets his moment, right? He gets that moment on the rooftop, but he also gets his moment towards the end where Peter has lost it and he's about to kill Harry Osborn, and he has the glider, picks up the glider, again, very recognizable moment, right? And goes to stab him with it, and it's Tobey Maguire that steps in the way and protects Norman Osborn, saves his life the way that he wasn't able to do in his own universe, in a way that I think is very, very cool. And it's a great payoff for that Spider-Man. Because, yeah, he was furious with him, but he didn't want him to die. So good. I also love that Aunt May's legacy lives on in the we're not going to kill him, we're going to cure him. And there's some really, really fun comedy with that with Ned. There's also a really great moment with Ned where he's like, so did you have a best friend? Tobey Maguire? And he's like, yeah, he died in my arms right after he tried to kill me. It's really sad. It's like, yeah, but that's been like 20 years for him. You know, it's horribly sad, but he's able to keep going. And it also reminds you he doesn't have another one. Spider-Man, it's a little moment, right? That you don't even realize is foreshadowing something. But it's a little moment that makes you go, oh man. And then in hindsight, you go, of course, yeah, no, he didn't get another best friend in the whole 20 years. It never happened. And by the end of this movie, neither will Tom Holland. And so, very, very good moments. My problems, right? Because we got to talk about my problems at some point. I think there are two big moments in this movie where I went, but why though? And the first one is the moment where he doesn't zap Osborn, and I get why in character, the purpose of that. The purpose was, well, Norman's coming with him by choice, so they don't do that. But if he had just zapped him and went back, they never would have been followed. The film team would never have been there, and it would have saved a lot of trouble later. Feels like some of that happened just for the movie to happen in a way. But I can let it slide, because again, Norman Osborn was coming with them willingly. Still would have preferred if he just zapped him, but it's fine. But the second big issue for me is and this one's bigger. Right at the end, great moment where Peter realizes what he has to do, right? Hey, I've got to make everybody forget who I am. Everybody has to forget Peter Parker so that the world can be saved. At 100% a Spider-Man choice, right? 100% a Peter Parker choice. And Strange does it after a very nice moment between him and Peter. And Peter tells MJ and Ned that he's going to leave, but he will find them. He promises he will find them. And then he's standing in front of them in the suit with his mask off, and he leaves so the spell can go off, I guess? But my first thought was, well, why doesn't he just stay there so that after the spell's done, they can go Spider-Man and go, actually, I'm Peter Parker. I'm your best friend. I'm actually Spider-Man, you know? And maybe the spell wouldn't go off if he was standing there. But that's the thing that I thought immediately was, well, why didn't he just stand there for a couple extra seconds? Surely they would have been like, how did we get here? Because as far as I could tell, nobody else was teleported. So they would have been confused. Maybe Doctor Strange took him home. But it felt like hey, if you just were stood there for another couple minutes, you could have just told them, But all in all, still very, very good movie. Despite those issues. Also, I still don't think Flash Thompson is a very good Flash Thompson in this universe. I think that he comes off way more as a frat boy than he ever did as a jock, in the older ones, which is unfortunate to me, but it doesn't ruin the movie for me. Yeah, I could just go on and on about this movie. The cinematography is great. There's some incredible shots. The shot of Peter on the roof when the other Peters come in and they're up on the top is so good. The shot of Doc Ock falling and catching himself on the skyscraper after the big fight. Very, very good. This movie has some incredible cinematography and some great fight choreography. I do think the fight in the Statue of Liberty gets a little messy with figuring out where everybody is because there's so many moving parts, but I don't know how else you could have fixed that in a location like that. But no, I think it was very good. The music is very solid. I don't think it's quite as memorable as like a Spider-Verse, but I think it was still very, very good. Yeah, this movie is great, and I love the way that it all ends up with Peter's on his own because he can't bring himself to tell MJ and Ned that he was their best friend, because if he does, they're just going to be back in danger again, and they could die just like Aunt May just did. And he's just got done being talked to by these other two Spider-Men that also have lost people that are very important to them. And it's like, yeah, how can he do that? Andrew Garfield just got done telling him he lost his girlfriend. Toby Mcguire just got done telling him he lost his best friend. How can he then choose to tell them, knowing that it could cost them their lives, get them involved again, and ruin their happiness? It's a very selfish choice, but it 100% is a Peter Parker choice. And I'm in love with this movie. I can't wait to watch it again. This movie's very, very good. Let me know your thoughts on Spider-Man No Way Home. I'm sure I forgot to bring up some things that were really cool and that I loved a lot. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. The Venom moment in the credits is very funny as well. But until next time, I've been Trey. This has been The Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum that Spider-Man No Way Home has to offer.